Hi, this is a Muslim response to Jordan Peterson. My message to you, Jordan, based on your message to Muslims a few months ago at the time of this recording. So I greet you with Assalamu alaikum, peace be with you, the same greeting that Jesus greeted his disciples as recorded in John chapter 20 verse 21, Shalom alaikum. So I think it's the best greeting one human being can give to one another. So I wish you peace and blessings from the United Kingdom. So I'm going to walk you through some of the topics I'm going to cover, and obviously I will do an introduction before I cover these particular topics I've listed down here. So I will touch on the Sunni-Shia issue because that was one of the first things you mentioned in terms of positive engagement, pen pals, whatever. So I will touch on with that and my work in this area. Engagement with Christians and the way forward for unity, I'll touch on that, and within that topic will be subtopics about my interviews with one of the conservative commentators in the United States, who was also an advisor to President Trump. Engagement with Christian missionaries. The third thing is engagement with Jews. And obviously we have the explosive topic of Israel and Palestine, and I think that does not need to be explosive. And I will touch on your very good interview with Benjamin Netanyahu, Prime Minister Netanyahu, and my thoughts around that and the way forward. Fourthly, politics in the far left. So again, it's engagement from my point of view as a conservative Muslim, with those who are on the opposite end of the political spectrum. So what did that engagement look like? I'll touch on that. And fifthly, I will actually push back on some of the things you said, maybe offer a challenge to one or two things you said. Sixthly and finally, I will respond to your critics. So the people, I think mainly Muslims, who criticized your message to Muslims, I'll be doing a critique of them as well, because I really did not agree in many things that they said. So those are the 6 topics. And I know you said that you may promote one or two Muslims who you find are worth promoting. So I hope you'll find that this is a useful engagement that we hopefully we will have. And maybe you might be able to promote my works. But obviously this is not about me and being promoted, but I think a serious engagement, and I'll invite you to certainly engage in a discussion, maybe a podcast, which you've done with some Muslims I've seen. So let me fire away. In terms of introduction, my name is Hassan. I was born in Bangladesh and I live in the UK, so I've been here for quite a while now. And I have been involved in politics. So I stood as a Conservative parliamentary candidate in 2005. Here in the UK, and I'm hoping to stand again soon once I've passed the reassessment, which I'm undergoing now. So your prayers and blessings would help on this matter. And I work for a multinational, so that's my normal job, as it were. But as I said, my other hat is politics, and I was involved with the UK government's counter-terrorism policy known as PREVENT. It was one of the 4 policies on counterterrorism. So PREVENT is where there is intervention on extremists. Some of them may be Muslims, some of them may be white extremists, supremacists, to make sure that their trajectory towards extremism or terrorism is actually mitigated, they are stopped, and they find another route. So I was involved in training some of the public servants. Again, that was a voluntary basis. There's been a lot of criticism about PREVENT, and I have engaged with some of the critics, but by and large I think it is a good policy, although obviously there have to be improvements. And yeah, so that's me in a nutshell. Right, so to come to your question about or advice about Sunnis and Shias and having pen pals, getting to know each other, I couldn't agree more. Excellent advice. Because there'd been too much fighting, which didn't actually start with Western intervention, as some critics would say, in terms of invasion of Iraq or Afghanistan. And yeah, of course, some of the, I mean, there's a lot of politics here. I mean, what started as a fracas, a political fracas between the two groups initially turn out to be more divergent in terms of theological basis. And that is feeding now into the divergent geopolitics and competition that we see in the Middle East, which is unfortunate. But I think in terms of engagement, I don't think that Sunnis and Shias are fighting as a majority. I think majority are living in peace with each other. And where they are fighting, there are obviously extremes, and it's the extreme examples that do get the airtime. So one would think mistakenly that this is a norm within Muslim society. It isn't. I mean, I've known Shia friends, I have Shia friends, I'm a Sunni myself. And what is the difference between the two? Well, here's my book that I just came out with, Aisha and Fatima, Ladies of Heaven, a Sunni response to Shiism. Okay, it's 471 pages, which is the exact number of pages that Prince Harry wrote for his book, which has just been published here in the UK. But anyway, I'm sure you'll find this equally riveting and exciting. This is actually for Muslims. Non-Muslims may find benefit. They may have to read it a few times because of the jargon in there. But this is actually my attempt of this pen pal that you advised. So you'll see this little symbol here is it's called Building Bridges. So it's a book series I have come up with, but the actual pen and paper pen pal did actually happen with me in the early 90s, actually late 80s, early 90s. So when I did correspond through pen and paper with someone in Iran who was a lecturer at a university, and I made we had good conversations. Now, the reason for showing this particular book is not just to plug this book, but in this is actually a dialogue I had with a Shia brother about 20 years ago in 2002, 2003, I think it was, over a 1 year period. So, and the reason why it was important is because dialogue, debate in a peaceful atmosphere of brotherhood is the way forward rather than fighting. So where there have been fighting by extremists on both sides, that is a no-go area. So that can happen, that has happened, and it should continue to happen. So here is a clip from my book trailer, which you'll be interested in. I'm happy to send you a free copy, Jordan, but you're welcome to purchase as well from Amazon Books. Right, so that was the Sunni-Shia issue. So there are about 2 billion Muslims in the world. I'm sure I'm not the only one out of the 2 billion that's had this sort of positive engagement with Shia or the Sunni-Shia communities. There is positive engagement going on, robust debates as well, which does need to happen to close the theological gaps. But it's happening. Right, the second issue about reaching out to Christians. So as you know, I think you mentioned in your message that Christians and Jews are given a title of respect, the people of the book, because there is some commonality between the three monotheistic faiths. It's obviously, as the word suggests, monotheism, belief in one God. There might be slight variations between the Christian understanding of God, the Trinity, 3 in 1, 1 in 3, and the Jewish Muslim understanding, which is a Unitarian figure, but that is a debate that has happened and continues to happen, which is fine. So engagement between Christians and Muslims have happened. In fact, the first engagement I came across was way back in the 80s. There have been so many debates since then over the last 40 years, but my all-time favorite engagement and debate has been between the Muslim debater, the late Ahmed Deedat, and Reverend Jimmy Swaggart. Reverend Jimmy Swaggart is one of my favorite Christian evangelist. I do like listening to him and his Sun Life broadcast. And of course, since then, his family is involved in evangelism, so Donny Swaggart, and so on. So that engagement did happen, and since then, loads of engagements, and your engagement as a Christian with some of the Muslims like Mohammed Hijab here in the UK and Sheikh Hamza Yusuf in America. It was very, very inspiring, and that is actually happening. You're going to see less fighting between Christians and Muslims and more of the engagement and debating, which you are wanting to see, and that is actually happening. Now, in terms of my specific engagement, I've engaged with Dr. Carol Swain, who was a professor, and she was also an advisor to President Trump. She led a 1776 commission in America, and we had a really, really good podcast. So I'm going to give the link in the description section where you can actually have a look. And a really enjoyable discussion that we had. She was a conservative Christian, I am a conservative Muslim.
Meet a Muslim who is conservative, unashamed, and bold when it comes to tackling radicals in his own community, as well as people in America who are following the wrong approach when it comes to political correctness and bringing about change in society. My next guest is all of that. It's making an impact in the world. And I'm going to refer to my notes as I read his introduction. Hassan Iman is a native of Bangladesh who has been living in the UK for 30 years. He ran for the British Parliament in 2005, and he's a member of the UK Conservative Party. But most interesting for us is that he's the author of a new book, United States of Anger, Why Linda Sarsour's Rage and Far-Left Violence Cannot Move Mountains. He's that kind of guy. Welcome, Hassan, to Conversations.
Thank you, Dr. Swain. An excellent introduction. Thank you.
Now, one thing I didn't mention in there was that whilst theological differences are important to discuss, because salvation does depend on that as well as works, good works, Christians and Muslims and Jews and people of other faiths or no faiths can actually work together. And I focused quite hard on the issue of abortion, because because Muslims are pro-life, Islam is a pro-life religion, with some exceptions. We can work together on this, considering that since 1973, 1 billion unborn children, babies, have been killed around the world, or over 67 million in America, which is a tragic travesty of human rights, absolutely disgraceful. So that's an area where Muslims, Christians can work quite solidly. I mean, at the moment, our Christian brothers and sisters are way ahead of us in terms of highlighting the issue of abortion and injustices here.
And so one of the things that interests both of us is whether or not Christians and Muslims can work together when there are areas of shared interest, because we do share the first 5 books of the Bible along with Jews. And so we are all the people of the book. And so, Hassan, what do you think, and why is it such a divergent? I think we do know why there's so much distrust between Christians and Muslims, and a lot of it has to do with the violence against Christians in the Middle East and parts of the world.
Yes, and also, post 9/11, there has been a lot of concern and fear amongst the non-Muslims about the Muslim community. In fact, I think you've heard of Katie Hopkins. She's a conservative. She moved to the US, and I do remember engaging with her when she was a radio host. That although these are a minority who are terrorists, they go against Islam, they go against the Quran in terms of killing innocent people, that we as Muslim community should actually rise up and condemn them even more so. And I've tried to do that myself. When I stood for Parliament, I did issue a challenge to one of the extremists who supported Al-Qaeda But they did not accept my invitation because they knew they could not win the debate when it comes to trying to prove the Quran supports terrorism. So I wasn't going to allow them to do that. So the fear is there, but I think the positive side is, as you said, the term people of the book is used in the Quran to describe Jews and Christians. And there is a verse, it says in chapter 3, verse 64, O people of the book, let's come to common terms between us and you, that we worship none but God, etc., etc. So we start on the basis of what is common, and I'm happy to say that Christians and Muslims and other faith communities have actually engaged in dialogue and debate since I can remember, from the 1980s. And it's largely been about theology, and whilst that is very, very important because it is about salvation, whilst we're talking about that, let's save some lives whilst we are on this earth. So since 1973, when 1 billion babies were killed through abortion, we need to work together because this is actually against Islam as well as Judeo-Christianity.
But you know something? Here in America, I never hear any Muslims talking about abortion. And as far as distrust between Christians and Muslims, I think that it has to do with the verses in the Quran that talks about killing the infidel. And we hear about, okay, if you kill the infidel, you get these 70 virgin brides. That is mostly what we hear. And I don't know what the answer is, because there are many people that they feel like Islam itself is the problem, and what they see describes the whole religion.
Sure, and I have heard discourses by Robert Spencer, Pamela Geller, who would, and Bridget Gabrielle, who would be of that viewpoint. But I think this is where dialogue and debate is actually necessary in a civil discourse. If people see problems with Islam, definitely, we should not be afraid to rise up to the challenge and debate and discourse and come to some form of understanding. In terms of the verse you referred to about killing infidels, I mean, this is in the context of warfare, where warfare is actually permitted, but it can't be the aggressor, but there is self-defense. So killing is mentioned in that context. But also that particular verse is followed by another verse that says, when an enemy soldier comes to you, then in peace, then take them to a place of peace and security. So, and this predated the Geneva Conventions of POWs. So it's things like these, platforms like these, we can overcome ignorance. And I think there's been a gap between the Muslim scholars in America and some of the people I've mentioned who do criticize Islam. That there needs to be more dialogue and debate, and certainly on the issue of where we do have commonality like abortion, like in the Quran in chapter 17, it does say, do not kill your children for fear of poverty.
Right.
This is extended to abortion. And that's why I was very frustrated when Linda Sarsour, Ilhan Omar, when they speak to Muslim groups and imams, there is no challenge back. And this is a fundamental issue, the sanctity of life.
So that's where we can cooperate. And also, I did respond to a group of Christian missionaries. You may have heard of Acts 17 Apologetics, and also David Word, Sam Shimon, etc. A couple of years ago, they produced a satire called Islamicize Me, which makes a mockery of some of the hadiths of the Prophet. So I did a short video from Mecca and Medina and Dubai in response to that. I mean, those brothers, Christian brothers I've mentioned, missionaries, they are very, very naughty boys. So, I hope you can give them a verbal spanking in the proverbial behind, moving forward, that we can actually have constructive debates and dialogues. Sticking with Christian missionaries, I did engage with Jay Smith. So you will be aware that in London we have a place called Hyde Park, Speaker's Corner, where people can just gather there and talk about anything they want on Sundays. So I used to go quite a bit actually, and I remember speaking with Jay Smith, who is quite versed in responding to Muslims, responding to Islam. In fact, Hyde Park Speaker's Corner would be a testing bed for him if he wanted to try out new things in terms of criticizing Islam, challenging Muslims. That's a good testing ground. And then he would debate with other Muslim speakers. on the platforms. So once he did lend me his ladder, which was really nice of him, and I did climb up and I did speak to the Christian audience, and I mentioned about the need for cooperation between Christians and Muslims while still maintaining the debate, the theological difference that are there. So that should continue, and that's my contribution to what is happening on the Christian-Muslim front. In terms of the Jews, I think you mentioned, dare I say, you should write to Jews or engage with Jews. And I think that's been happening as well. Despite what we see in the media about skirmishes, wars and killings and violence in Israel and Palestine, between Israelis and Palestinians, Jews and Muslims generally have good relations, and you will know historically Jews and Muslims have been at peace, especially when Christian crusaders had kicked Jews out. So there was a relative peace. I'm not saying it was rosy, but it was definitely peaceful. And I do remember, again, in the late 80s, early 90s, there was a group here in the UK called the Calamus Foundation. I don't know if they exist or not, but this was a group to engage in dialogue between Jews and Muslims. And, engagement between rabbis and imams have actually happened and continue to happen. Now, I did mention that I responded to a group of Christian missionaries about Islamicized me, and I said I did the video in Mecca, Medina, and in Dubai. Now, in Dubai, when I was there, whilst recording that, I made a tangential remark about Israel. So I looked towards Israel when I was in Dubai, and I said, look, our Muslim brothers should recognize, our Jewish brothers should recognize the Jewish state of Israel and unite on Abrahamic brotherhood. And you did mention the Abrahamic Accords, which is really, really good. And it's quite interesting because I made that video in 2018. 2 years later, the UAE recognized the state of Israel. So I don't know if the royal family did listen to my video or not, but I also made another prayer that Saudi Arabia does recognize the state of Israel, that the land of the prophet reaches out to the land of the prophets in Abrahamic brotherhood, because that is the solution there. Now, what is interesting is the Abraham Accords is something that is positive, but it has received some criticism from Palestinians and from Muslims. I don't know about the views of Jews or religious Jews, but I think that religion is the answer to the problems there. Okay, it is the Holy Land, it's the land of the prophets, and so far the engagement really has been secular. No intervention of religious principles, which is a shame, really, and that's why we haven't seen peace. There's been no solutions. So unity on Abrahamic brotherhood, that is the key there. You cannot erase religion from this. It needs to be included. And I made this point actually way back, I think 20 years ago, or when I appeared on a TV political show, and asked Dr. Ghada Karmi, who is a Palestinian activist, I said that we should look to religion to find the answers to the problems there. Her answer was, well, it's not a religious war, therefore, she did not agree with the idea, which is very unfortunate. So I wrote to her to invite her to engage in a debate about terrorism, because I think she was indicating, and this is just after the 9/11 attacks, she was indicating that because of the problems, the oppression of Palestinians, therefore this was a reaction to the attack on the Twin Towers, and she seemed to be justifying it. And so I invited her to debate on this issue because Islam does not support terrorism, it condemns it. And the use of religion to actually unite Jews, Christians and Muslims in the Holy Land. But for some reason, the Palestinian activism has not recognized that. So it remains to be seen how the Abraham Accords pans out. In terms of my own engagement, I'm currently engaging with an Israeli Jew. Another link I'm going to put in the description box is to an article on medium.com, where we look at the final solution to the problem, the Israel-Palestine problem. So I have tried to engage with some Muslims who do not agree with recognizing the state of Israel, and also with an Israeli Jew, because I think religion is important. And where we're at the moment in terms of our dialogue and engagement is the role of Ishmael in Jewish understanding. Ishmael and the blessings that his nation has had by God, that's given in Genesis, I think, chapter 16, and what the future of the descendants of Ishmael, how is that relevant to Judaism and what's happening in the Middle East? That's where we're at the moment. So we have a disagreement in terms of the covenant, and is it Isaac only, or does it cover Ishmael and his descendants? And this is the exact dialogue that needs to happen. Now, Israel is the only country that I know of that holds the Jewish halakha, the Islamic equivalent, which is Sharia, and secular laws on par with each other, which is very, very interesting, because we hear in Europe and in America, maybe Canada, I don't know, that there is some skepticism about Sharia. When you mention Sharia, that's it. This is about terrorism and oppression, women's rights, and so on and so forth. But Israel is a light in the Middle East, I think, where they do hold Sharia on an equal footing, and this is to cater for the Israeli Muslims. 20% of Israelis are Arabs or Palestinians, and there are some Israeli Jews who are Muslim converts as well. But anyway, at the risk of digressing, let me come back to the engagement with Jews. So this needs to happen, as I say. And in terms of your dialogue with Benjamin Netanyahu, it was very good, and it was quite enlightening to see how under his premiership as a conservative, he implemented policies that improved the economy of Israel and turbo boosted the research and development compared to the socialist past, which I think is reflective of the success of capitalism in improving society, eliminating poverty, and that's the trajectory India followed as well. After they ditched socialism in the early 90s, plugged into the global marketplace, and now they are a rising superpower. So it was an interesting insight. I think the only pushback I would have on that particular discussion is when Prime Minister Netanyahu said that Israel, or when the Arabs were ruling the land, it was barren, and when Israel was created recently, then it's developed, so there is some claim to that land when you've developed it, and beforehand it was barren. I think the only problem with that argument is if Israel or Palestine was barren when Arabs conquered it a few hundred years ago, that means it was barren before Arabs conquered it, which means if the Jews were there before the Muslims came, and of course it's a long discussion as to who can claim for whatever reason, but anyway, if the Jews were there beforehand, and there is a connection that they have to Israel, which is true, just like we Muslims have a connection to Mecca and Medina, and that can never be broken, they have a connection to Jerusalem, and that should be respected. So the argument is they had a historical connection, but the land was barren at that time, wasn't it? Before the Arab conquest. So does that mean they should not have lived there because it was barren? No. So that's where Netanyahu's argument does actually fall down. And in terms of another pushback I would have had was the Israeli Defense Force, they do have a policy of, like most other armies in the government, of not targeting innocent civilians. And in some cases, actually in many cases, they drop leaflets to warn people for civilians to move out of that area before the army bombs them. I do not know of any other army that does that. And I think it's a lesson for Muslims, because when it comes to killing innocent civilians in wartime, that is a no-go according to Quranic standards and the example of the Prophet. So that's something we should be adopting. But the pushback on this is that despite that, in recent skirmishes, wars, innocent civilians had died, the Palestinians, under Israeli bombardment. And how did that happen? I watched the collapse of the Al Jazeera building live on TV when Israel bombed that. I don't think any civilians were killed there. But generally, in the recent skirmishes in Gaza, I think 200 people, innocent Palestinians, were killed and 67 children. So how did this happen if there is a policy of not killing innocent civilians? So maybe there could have been a pushback on that front. And not many Muslims know this, but there is a sizable peace movement within Israel. Israelis themselves, who do criticize the Israeli government, Yeah, another area of pushback would be that Benjamin Netanyahu is, I think, a religious Jew, fairly orthodox, and you are a conservative Christian, and of course, Muslim conservatives, conservative Muslims as well, would hang on to our religious principles. So the Quran and Sunnah, the way of the Prophet from a Muslim point of view, holding on to the New Testament from the Christian point of view, and the Torah, the Tanakh, the Talmud, the Mishnah, so on and so forth from a Jewish point of view. How can we utilize and harmonize some of the common principles, and that is a Quranic approach, find the common grounds, so that people, Jews, Muslims, Christians, and other faiths or non-faiths can live in peace and harmony based on these religious principles in Israel? Because Israel at the moment, and I mentioned this to my Israeli Jewish interlocutor with whom I'm having a dialogue with, that it is a secular state. Israel promotes secularism, although it does hold Sharia halakha laws as well. But there is more opportunity for religious principles to be firmly embedded in Israel, Palestine, and that is the way forward. That should have been discussed. And also, a lot of Palestinians will argue about the Nakba, when a lot of families were kicked out in 1948, I think it was, and there's a right of return argument. So how is that going to work? And also the wall that has been built in Gaza, it's known as a prison. What needs to happen so that the wall can come down? What needs to happen so that peace can break out? Because when we see pictures of children being killed, anyone who actually watches that, whether you're Muslim, Christian, Jew, whoever, the immediate reaction should be, what can we do to stop this killing? How can peace break out? Because peace is the answer there. And again, just to reiterate my willingness to engage with fellow Jewish brothers, I did try to reach out to the Israeli ambassador to the UK, Zippy Hotovli, during the Gaza war, to really get her opinion, because she was being clobbered in the media outlets here in the UK. But I think a proper engagement, and she's a religious Jew as well, and I think, again, religion, that's where the answer lies. I've also tried to engage with an Israeli Arab, Yosef Haddad. He's a Christian Arab, a very, very proud Israeli, and he's been around trying to promote the Israeli side of things, and why the propaganda against Israel is wrong. We have Mohammed Kabiya, who's a Muslim, who served in the Israeli Defense Force. So you have people, Arabs there, who are very, very pro-Israel, so their voices are not heard either. So I did try to engage with Yosef Haddad, and I hope that actually does happen, as with Ambassador Zippy Hotovli. And also, what I forgot to mention, sticking with the Christian and Jewish engagement, I was a member of Daily Wire. I did subscribe to them for 2 years. And I did enjoy watching the videos and debates of Ben Shapiro and Matt Walsh, Candace Owens. And I did actually propose a podcast where Ben Shapiro, as a conservative Jew, both politically and religiously conservative, Candace Owens as a conservative Christian, and myself as a conservative Muslim, politically and religiously, that we engage in dialogue or a trialogue and see what are the common principles for us to move forward. So I hope that engagement does happen. Right, in terms of the engagement with another group of people, so this is the far left. So after the killing of George Floyd, I came up with this book, United States of Anger, Why Lyndon Sarsour's Rage and Far Left Violence Cannot Move Mountains, Thoughts of a British Muslim Conservative. And again, you can see the symbol building bridges, because I did try to engage with Lyndon Sarsour and those on the far left. And some of the dialogue I did have with those progressives in America and the far left are actually captured in this book as well. Again, it's the intention to engage in positive dialogue. And certainly when I observe American way of doing things, it is absolutely appalling, the amount of polarization there has been. Also, another example of engagement with the far left is the topic on abortion. So another link I'm giving in the description is a dialogue I'm engaged with at the moment. So I'm pro-life, as you'd expect. Islam is pro-life, Muslims are pro-life, as Christians, Jews, so on and so forth. So I've engaged with the sister of the ex-Prime Minister, Boris Johnson. Her name is Rachel Johnson. And also some other pro-choice advocates. I think, again, this issue is so polarized. There can be common ground that can be found. So you'll see in the appended article, which includes the dialogue we're having with pro-choicers, that we can actually move forward, and it's a dialogue that needs to happen. So engagement with the far left, pro-choicers, feminists, that is actually happening. And also, sticking with the far left, I came out with another book, BAME, Breaking Through Barriers. Again, you see that symbol there, building bridges. This was a direct response to the critics of a race report that came out in 2021, headed by Dr. Tony Sewell. So they came out with their report, which showed that there is improvement amongst ethnic communities in the UK. They questioned the existence of institutional racism, and that's why they had a blowback, unfortunately, from those on the left, the far left, criticizing them for being Uncle Toms or being house Negroes. Very, very insipid and racist remarks from the very people you'd think would not be racist, those on the far left. So all these books are actually are non-academic, by the way. These are not scholarly books. This is for the layman, written by a layman like myself. But in this book, I do challenge academics, actually, those who criticize the Sewell report. And I did invite them to debate and dialogue, and offered them to capture their comments, so their response to the original manuscript that I sent them, and I would capture them in this book. So the invitation still stands, if they're still listening. And this book did receive acclaim from the British government. So I give a nuanced insight as someone from a Bangladeshi background, and responding to the critics of the Sewell report.
Hey, what's up, y'all? This is Montel Jordan. Many of you would have or may have read the independent CRED report commissioned by the government. And listen, whatever your views on the report are, you probably agree that constructive debate is what's needed to overcome racial and ethnic disparities. My man Hassan Imam's book, BAME, Breaking Through Barriers, provides nuanced insights to unite divergent opinions. And listen, it doesn't matter what side of the debate you're on, we should all be allies against racism. And by doing so, we can celebrate the successes of Black and minority ethnic communities. Thank you for your contributions, Hassan, because this is how we do it.
In terms of responding to your critics, so there have been some Muslims who were a bit surprised. Some of them, I think, were offended. There is nothing offensive in what you said. There might be, in their perception, there's some ignorance. But hey, listen, we Muslims, we're going to be ignorant on a few things. As a Sunni, I'm sure many Sunnis are ignorant about the details of Shi'ism and the branches of Shi'ism. We might be ignorant about the halakha, about the 613 mitzvot. So this is not, so we're not, those critics should not be disparaging you that way. You had a genuine question. Your message was a genuine attempt to engage positively with Muslims. So I really welcome that. There was nothing offensive in there. Another response, critic of you, was the Usuli Institute. So it was a video I watched by Grace Song. So she is one of the, I think, one of the leads in the Usuli Institute. I never heard of that organization before, but I only came across it very recently, literally within a few days ago before recording this. And they seem to be sort of liberal Muslims, but when they talked about your message to Muslims, I think they were very, very scathing against you. And they criticized other Muslim responses for being too wishy-washy and too weak. Apparently, Grace Song and the Usuli Institute's response was apparently very, very strong. And they had a video as well. They played a video of a critic, a severe critic of Israel. Okay, so have a listen to this.
But Peterson knows he's being ridiculous. He's only repeating rehearsed lines given to him by the Israel lobby. And if somehow my radar is off, and he's not advancing the interests of Israel for personal gain, well, then he's even dumber than we thought. Because what we would have here is a rich white dude living securely in a safe and prosperous nation, urging Uyghur Muslims to make pen pals with the same Chinese people that are exterminating them in Xinjiang. If he's not a paid agent of Israel, then he's just a total moron, which would explain why he dresses up his lies and ignorance with pseudo-intellectual gobbledygook to make you believe he actually knows what he's talking about. But if somehow he accidentally trips on the sidewalk and falls face first into a fucking library, he will learn that sectarianism in the Muslim world was harnessed and fueled by European colonial powers who sought to plunder Muslim lands by dividing and conquering indigenous Muslim populations. How can any Muslim in good conscience make a pen pal with Jews that are stealing their land and homes and bombing them in steel cages?
I wish Muslims would have this type of response.
And in order I totally disagreed with what he said. So when the phrase was used, oh, you should not be writing to these Jews who are stealing your land, what is the difference between that and anti-Semitism when you think you're pushing a narrative that Jews are thieves? This is wrong. Now, we Muslims, we have an issue, with Islamophobia, people who misunderstand the religion. So we would call out people who are Islamophobic. Yet there is no problem when people are being anti-Semitic. And so that's a reflection for us as Muslims to take away and change, because racism is not allowed in Islam, as you know. So that was a very, very fierce criticism there. And again, their focus really was on the Israeli-Palestinian issue, the skirmishes that have gone on, the killings. And it is interesting that the Sunni Institute seems to be siding with some of the Muslim activists in America who are generally on the left. So socialist activism amongst Muslims is the norm, it seems, in America. So Linda Sarsour, we have Congresswoman Ilhan Omar, Rashida Tlaib. They're all very left-wing, but also anti-Israel. Now, being you can criticize Israeli policies, that's fine. But sometimes we have to be aware that those who are really Jew haters, anti-Semites, may use criticize Israeli policy as a cover for their anti-Semitism. Now, I'm not saying that activists I mentioned are anti-Semites and they have tried to engage with Jews, but the fierce criticism of Israel is, there is a better way of engaging. And I did mention to Linda Sarsour that she, as an activist, should be engaging with her Zionist counterpart or her Israeli counterpart, so that a true dialogue can be had, and that will be a step closer to peace. So that really needs to happen. So that's my response to the critics of your message. My final message is, I hope you found this response to be useful and engaging. In terms of whether you're going to promote me or not, I think the best way you can help me is to promote some of these books. More importantly, I think if we engage in a dialogue, a discussion, that would be very good, very helpful. The only one question I have for you, and maybe if we do engage in discussion, you can answer this, is I've watched your discussions with Hamza Yusuf and Mohammed Hijab, and they were very, very good. So my question to you is, what pushback do you have about the Quran and about Islam? Okay, so what question do you have? What is the issue which would stop you from believing that the Quran is the word of God, or the Islam is the last, or the Prophet Muhammad is the last prophet out of a line of prophets that started from Adam? Because obviously you would have had further thoughts from your engagement with Muslims. I think I understood from your initial introduction that you've also engaged with the critics of Islam, I think, if I understood you correctly. So I mentioned some of the Christian missionaries, ex-Muslims. I forgot to say that I've also engaged with some of the ex-Muslims, and that needs to happen. So what issue do you have? So that would be my challenge back to you. So I hope you found this useful, and I hope we can engage. And again, I bid you blessings from the UK to you and your family. So assalamu alaikum. Peace be with you. And I thought it would make sense to have a bonus section where you can see further engagements with various groups and various people. I left that to the end. Now, the next two items are actually the speeches I gave to the Conservative Party conference here in the UK in 2001, just after the 9/11 attacks, and 2006. So both of these little snapshots are my speeches based on terrorism, Islam, and community cohesion. So you can take a look.
Can I now call Hassan Ali Imam?
We've entered a new phase in our history where emotions are flying high, and the true test of our civility is how we treat one another in times of crisis. To those Muslims who've been attacked by racists and bigots, I'd ask you to remain calm and restrain yourselves. If you are taunted by these people, then invite them to the mosques, listen to them, talk to them, and tell them about our faith, that they may have an understanding that Islam is not the same as terrorism. I'm originally from Bangladesh, and I've been here for 27 years, so I know the indigenous British population very well. They are decent, tolerant, open to discussion and debate, and they are conservatives at heart. Now that I like. We should use these qualities to build and rebuild bridges between communities, that we may reach a new level of understanding. Indeed, the true test of our civility is how we treat one another in times of crisis. And the true test of our humanity is how we treat our enemies in times of war. In any war situation, the real casualties are innocent men, women, and children. So let us not forget these people in Afghanistan. And I'm glad that President Bush and Prime Minister Blair have given aid to these people. I want Muslim countries like Iran and Pakistan to reopen their borders so they can help these refugees. And we should do all we can as well to help them, because Osama bin Laden certainly will not. There's only one thing I want to say to this man. If you want to end this now, then come out of hiding, give yourself up, and stand for trial. Do not hide behind the cover of innocent men, women, and children. Only cowards do that. And don't believe for one moment that the hijackers of New York were martyrs. The only martyrs there were the firemen, police officers, the rescue workers who went back inside the building to save lives. Now there's the difference between heroes and cowards. And to those of you who lost friends, who lost relatives, and lost faith as a result, my message to you is this: don't despair. Be brave and be strong. Because if you give up on life, then you will give in to terrorism. Madam Chairman, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to end with a quote from one of my favourite verses in the Quran, which should serve as a platform for any foreign policy, but is also an answer to terrorism, hatred, and bigotry. In chapter 49, verse 13, it says, "O mankind, we created you from a single pair of a male and a female, and made you into nations and tribes, that you may know one another and not despise each other. Verily, the most honoured amongst you in the sight of God is he who is most righteous, and God is all-knowing, all-aware." Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, is Hassan Ali Imam, and Hassan had the incredible delight of standing against Dennis Skinner at the 2005 general election.
Thank you very much. We're living in a world where innocent people are the victims of warfare and terrorism. Mr. Chairman, respected guests, ladies and gentlemen, let me share with you the worldview of someone who is Muslim by faith, Bangladeshi by birth, British by nationality, and conservative at heart. Yours truly. Let me take you back 10 years ago, when President Clinton's Secretary of State, Madeleine Albright, was asked whether the killing of children in Iraq was justified. Her answer was yes. Those of you in this hall and those of you watching at home may share different beliefs and values, but we can share one thing, and that is innocent people must never be targeted in any war. That is just. But justice is also about beating terrorism for good, and there are three ways to beat terrorism. Firstly, the best weapon terrorists use is the fear of bombing they instill in people. So we must never fear terrorists, and we must never, ever give in to terrorism. Secondly, the best weapon governments can use is not necessarily bombing, but a strong intelligence network. Thirdly, more importantly, people of all faiths all around the world must unite. It says in the Quran, in chapter 3, verse 64, "O people of the book, O Jews and Christians, come to common terms between us and you, that we worship none but God." In Isaiah chapter 1, verse 18, it says, "Come now, let us reason together, saith the Lord." If we can all unite ourselves based on these common principles, then terrorism will crumble, and that's a promise. Britain needs the best leader to unite nations. Labour has had their best, and he's about to go. For the Liberal Democrats, the best is yet to come. For us Conservatives, the best has come, and his name is David Cameron. Thank you. Thank you.
So my next contribution is with the BBC Big Questions, where there was some discussion about the Ten Commandments and whether it's relevant today in the UK or not. And I mentioned about Judeo-Christianity and Islam as well, and other religions, why there should be more cooperation on the common values that we share.
And in the audience, yes, sir, what would you like to say?
Thanks. I think Alan sort of has proven the point that you don't really need a new Ten Commandments, because you can adapt the existing. Now, in the 400th anniversary of the King James Bible, David Cameron actually recognised the value of Judeo-Christianity in modern Britain, and there should be more focus on that going forward. Now, from a Muslim point of view, it's quite refreshing. I actually agree with that. Refreshing to see a politician actually use religion in a positive context. Now, whilst we may not need a new Ten Commandments, I agree with the words of Rabbi Jonathan Sacks, whose words are actually quoted in the book Triple Jeopardy by Bishop Michael Nazir Ali, who says that Jews and Christians should work together to reclaim the soul of Europe through biblical teachings. Now, I'd go further and say, hang on guys, work with the Muslim community and the Sikhs and Buddhists, because there are a lot of social problems that we can address.
Okay, also work with non-believers. And this has been the problem of Richard Dawkins, that he's been so busy attacking what he sees as superstition of religion, which I agree with it to a large part, but he's not focused on what atheists also need. I would add to your category, non-believers. Non-believers deserve to be part of an ethical project.
The next one is my support of a Christian doctor, where he got into trouble from the medical establishment because he invited one of his patients to go to a church to get some spiritual healing, and obviously being a doctor, medical science, that was a no-go area. So I actually defended him on that. So you can see that again on BBC The Big Questions.
Surely you should be the one that should be the first to help.
Gentlemen here, yeah, go on.
Yeah, 2 points. Firstly, as a Muslim couple, we did have consultations with committed Christian doctors and nurses. We've had conversations about God, and they encourage more faith in God. And as a Muslim couple, we actually appreciated the advice. It's not bad medical practice, because unlike what the GMC or the British Humanist Association say, because they fail to realise that psychology is a part of the healing process. And my second point is that even though I am British and I've been in a Christian boarding school, I can see things as an outsider, because I am a Muslim Bangladeshi, and what I see is a slow vaporization of Jewish Christian values from our society, where Christians feel isolated. And even as a Muslim, I feel very, very sad.
That's your bigger platform, isn't it?
And I've got the Margate Muslims behind me supporting. I've got a Muslim doctor.
So as well as engaging dialogue with adversaries, I also try to challenge people from my side of the political spectrum, the Conservative side, So the next clip is actually my discussion with Katie Hopkins, believe it or not. She was and is the most hated woman in Britain. And she migrated to America, I think, recently. But she did host a radio talk show on LBC, and I did a call, this I think in 2017, after the Westminster Bridge attacks in London. And at that moment in time, generally she is very anti-Muslim and anti-Islam, but at that moment in time, I think she was very, very open to Islam and Muslims. So it depends on how we Muslims engage with people who have very extreme views like her. But unfortunately, she was taken off air because of very extreme things she said, people did not agree with. And what happens is when you shut down communication and you kick her out of a well-reputed media outlet, then people can go into extremes. And unfortunately, Katie Hopkins has gone further into extremes there. But here's a clip of my engagement with Katie Hopkins.
Hassan, you're in Slough. What would you like to say, sir?
Hi, Katie. I don't think you should be banned. You have the right to have an opinion and air that opinion. I'd respect that. Now, to give you some background, I'm originally from Bangladesh. I'm a Muslim. I studied in a Christian school.
Is it Bangladesh Independence Day today?
It is, yes.
Ha ha! Congratulations and well done and good.
Thank you very much indeed. Yes, my daughter goes to a Catholic school. I'm a governor of a Muslim school. I stood as a Tory candidate for Parliament in 2005, fairly right-wing in my views. I'm involved with Prevent as well, the counter-terrorism programme. So you can't get more integrated than that.
Of course.
Now, what I'm interested in is whether the reaction was right or wrong. What is important is how do we move forward. Now, I did listen to your interview with Tucker Carlson on Fox News and read your article online. It was very, very interesting and you should be asking challenging. So one way forward, number one, is we as Muslims, we should be doing more to challenge the fanatics and the terrorist-inclined people because they do not have any leg to stand on or any balls to hang out when it comes to defending their actions through the Quran and the word of the Prophet. They don't, because I did try to challenge them when I stood for Parliament, when they said I was an unbeliever for being part of the political process. You may remember Alma Hajaroon at that time, and they actually backed down in the end. They did not go forward with that debate because they knew that they would not win. The second thing we need to do is we do need to stand united, because if we don't, if we think that we're going to be afraid of Muslims or terrorists, that's exactly what the terrorists want. They will be winning the psychological war. We cannot allow them to do that. My reassurance to the non-Muslims who are listening, who have been afraid over the last few days, is for every Muslim fanatic that might be wanting to harm you, to kill you, there will be at least 1,000 Muslims who will be there to defend you, who will give up their lives, to defend you. So you should not be worried. Feel free to go into a mosque and ask questions. If you see a Muslim on the street, a woman in a hijab or whatever, go up to them, ask them about their faith, etc. That's the way forward, I think, mutual understanding. Now, my final point is when you said in your article, I think, that if Muslims want to practice Islam, they can go back to a Muslim country. What I'll say to that is, yes, any religion will have a point of origin, but in terms of the practice and the adoption, it could be worldwide. Otherwise, Jews and Christians would have to go back to Israel.
Mm-hmm. Let me ask you a question, Hassan, and it's to get your honest perspective on how you've seen and how you interpret people carrying on as normal. Is that a sufficient response? Is that enough for us all to carry on as normal, go to work, drink your cup of tea, do what people have said, get on your trains? Is that okay? And where does that leave us, Hassan, going forwards? As you say, let's move forwards with, say, 3,000 that are on the terror watch list. Are we just waiting then, whilst we're carrying on as normal, drinking our cup of tea, are we waiting then for the next car to plough us down, whomever is at the wheel?
Yes, I'm always conscious of the fact, even before the terrorist incident took place, I was always conscious. Whenever I go on the tube, I will scan everyone, and if I board a plane, whatever. I do pass Parliament now and again I'm always on the lookout. So that's my way forward. You asked the question, what we're doing now as normal, is that enough?
Yeah.
I don't think it's enough. It's at least what they should be doing. They should not be scared to come out. That's the minimum I would expect. But we should be doing more. And the first thing I said was we must challenge the terrorists.
Yes, you did say that.
Head on. Because it's all well and good, and the imams in the mosque, yes, they do condemn it, terrorism. But those fanatics, those young people, they will not be listening to those imams. They'll be listening to those recruiters through the internet secretly. The parents won't be even aware. That's what we need to do, is to get through to them. And how do we do that? We challenge the terrorists directly, so at least we can reach out to those followers. That's the first thing. And secondly, as I said, feel free to go into a mosque, ask questions. Don't be afraid.
And my question then, Hassan, it builds on that, is, so when we said we are not cowed, we stand united, Theresa May came out of number 10 after that meeting, and she said we'll carry on. And that's exactly it, Hassan. I needed something better than that. I needed something more than we will carry on. What I wanted was the same kind of thing as the Dutch had in 1953 with their Watersnoodrop, where they said there was the massive floods. And they came out after those massive floods and they said, never again. And that's what I wanted, Hassan.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, ceteris paribus is not enough. We do need to move forward, and I hope the two things I suggested I hope you agree with that. That might be a way forward.
Of course, and I really respect your call. I respect everything you've been doing. In fact, working within your school, your daughter's at another school, at a Catholic school, and you're a member of the school, a governing body at a Muslim school. Fantastic, and fantastic to hear you speak on LBC, to give you the opportunity to help reassure people, but also for us, I think you and I would say we were agreed on the point of looking for more positive action, perhaps to reassure some of us who feels that we are squashed as a society, to say, where is this never again, or is it until next time? Hassan, thank you so much for your call.
And in the spirit of challenging people to discussion, debate and dialogue, this was from my own side, the Conservative side, where I called out Dr. Simone Gold in America, who is an anti-vaxxer. She did not like the COVID vaccine, so she called it the experimental vaccine. And there was a lot of conspiracy theories around this. And a lot of people from the Conservative side, unfortunately, did succumb to the magic of what they were saying in terms of conspiracy theories. And I really had to call her out on her scaremongering about the COVID vaccine. So I wrote an article, and I did try to invite Simone Gold to a dialogue and a debate, or those who were her colleagues in the organisation, the America's Frontline Doctors, I think it was. So I provided the link to that particular article in medium.com. So you'll see in the description there a long article. I did get a couple of doctors to review that article, and they said it was actually very, very good. So I have no problems in challenging my own side when I think they are wrong. And in this case, Simone Gold is wrong. So you click on the link in the description to read the article. So I hope all these materials helped, especially the extra materials. I know I'm in danger of doing a self-promoting sort of blatantly, but I think because you had a genuine attempt to reach out to Muslims and provide your insights, which I'm grateful for, then I'm sure that what you've seen in terms of my what I've told you here, my speeches, my attempt to engage, more importantly, with people with variant backgrounds, variant views, dialogue and discussion and debate are the only way forward. And I hope you found this engagement to be very useful, productive and beneficial for you, your family, for your followers as well on YouTube and elsewhere. But more importantly, as I say, as I conclude, that I hope we have a podcast, a Zoom Teams podcast, and maybe we can have further positive engagement. And when I mentioned earlier on that I wish I could engage with some of the people from Daily Wire, Candace Owens, Ben Shapiro, and given that you are part of Daily Wire Plus, then maybe you can make that happen as well. Okay, once again, Assalamu alaikum, peace be with you.